When the curtain finally fell on Idi Amin Dada's rule in Uganda in April 1979, the man once called the conqueror of the British Empire vanished from the stage of African power into the deserts of the Middle East. The world watched with disbelief as a man who had ruled with an iron fist, a mixture of humor and horror, simply disappeared. Few could imagine where he had gone, and fewer still could have pictured how he would live out the rest of his days, not in a palace of command, but in quiet isolation, in the sacred kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is the story of how Idi Amin, the soldier, the showman, the feared ruler of Uganda, lived his final decades in exile. It is a portrait of paradox, of a man once feared by millions, now pacing the quiet streets of Jeddah, feeding on memories, faith, and nostalgia for a country that had rejected him. The flight from power. It all began on April the 11th, 1979, when Tanzanian forces, backed by Ugandan exiles of the Uganda National Liberation Army, closed in on Kampala. Amin's once mighty army had collapsed into chaos. From his residence at Cape Town View in Munyonyo, Amin held an emergency meeting with his most loyal officers, among them Major Luka Yuma, Captain Asio, and Sergeant Yosa of the State Research Bureau. They all knew the truth. The war was lost. And so, with a heavy silence and the smell of defeat in the air, Amin picked up his 15-round machine pistol, the one Yasser Arafat had given him years earlier as a wedding gift, and began his escape. His Mercedes-Benz 280 CE roared out of Munyonyo with a convoy of loyal escorts. They weaved through Mutajazi, past Mukwano Road, until they joined Jinja Road, the highway east toward safety. By April the 23rd, Amin and his wife Zam Naboye were on a C-130 aircraft, leaving from Arua airstrip, escorted by a Russian military attaché. Their first destination was Iraq, then Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi, one of Amin's old allies, welcomed him briefly. But Libya soon grew cold to the exiled Ugandan general. Gaddafi, though sympathetic, did not wish to host a man whose reputation had become an international burden. In late 1979, after the violent seizure of Mecca's Grand Mosque by extremists, Saudi Arabia quietly offered refuge. And so began the final chapter of Idi Amin's life, not as a ruler, but as a guest in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Arrival in the kingdom. It was late December of 1979 when a DC-9 jet touched down at King Abdulaziz International Airport in Jeddah. At the terminal, Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud, the director of Saudi intelligence, waited to receive him. He offered Amin a Cadillac limousine and arranged for the Ugandan to be settled discreetly at the luxurious Sands Hotel. At first, the Saudi government granted Amin and his family a monthly stipend. Reports suggest between $25,000 and $30,000, paid through Citibank and Arab Bank in Amman, Jordan. The kingdom treated him as a political guest, under the condition that he never engage in politics again. In those early years, Amin was a man suspended between two worlds, the ghost of the general he once was, and the fading echo of his own myth. In public, he wore a simple white thobe, a Muslim skull cap, and large maroon boots. He no longer marched surrounded by soldiers. He now walked alone, his gait still proud, though slightly slowed by a limp in his left leg. Life in Jeddah. Idi Amin's first years in Jeddah were strangely peaceful. He rented a modest home near the city center, where he would later be recognized by locals at the Shahan Hotel, a favorite hangout of businessmen and travelers. He spent most of his mornings reciting the Quran, a practice that became his daily ritual. Faith, it seemed, was now his armor. But he was not poor. His Saudi allowance gave him comfort. He drove around Jeddah in a white Cadillac, sometimes a Mercedes-Benz, both symbols of his lingering taste for grandeur. Yet, he told one journalist that he no longer cared for cars the way he once did. "There are so many models these days," he said, "I can drive any type one want." He would later move to a larger home in an exclusive district north of Jeddah, not far from the sea, where many powerful oil sheikhs lived. There, behind high walls and heavy wooden gates, Amin created a quiet world for himself, a world filled with memories of Uganda. Food and homesickness. Amin remained loyal to Ugandan cuisine. Even in Saudi Arabia, he ate as if he was still in his home in Kiboko. He had cassava flour, millet flour, and matuk shipped to him regularly through Nairobi and London. His friends and relatives in Uganda would send him food parcels, and he personally supervised their collection at King Abdulaziz International Airport. His favorite meal was goat meat with millet bread, a dish that reminded him of home. He often said that the taste of Uganda-grown food could not be matched anywhere else in the world. These small rituals, the smell of cooked goat, the touch of warm millet, gave him comfort in exile. Amin's wives and family in exile. Amin's domestic life in Saudi Arabia was complex and often lonely. By the time he arrived, most of his wives were scattered across the world. His wife Sarah Kayolaba, famously known as Suicide Sarah for her dance troupe performances, had fled to London with their 3 children. She ran a restaurant and later a hair salon, living quietly far from her former husband's shadow. Medina Najemba, another wife, relocated to Zaire after first moving to Paris. Her son with Amin, Abdul Nasser Mwanga, grew up in Mobutu's Zaire, where the dictator offered them a home in Mbinza. Zamzam Naberye, who had accompanied Amin during his final flight from Uganda, stayed briefly in Zaire before returning to Uganda to rejoin the police. But Amin did not live alone. In the early 1980s, he married Sawuya Leila Nasali Kabeja Kigandu, a youthful Ugandan woman who brought energy to his aging life. They lived together in Jeddah, where Amin became a familiar figure at the Macarona salon, having his hair trimmed and dyed black every week to hide the grey. Their marriage had its lighter moments. Amin began to enjoy Western, rock and roll, music, particularly the Monkees' Uncle by the Beach Boys, a surprising choice for a man who once marched soldiers to war songs. Yet, even surrounded by family, Amin's home was often filled with silence. The laughter of his many children, he fathered more than 50, echoed faintly through phone calls and letters. Many lived abroad, scattered from Kenya to Europe. Faith, music, and leisure. Religion played a central role in Amin's new life. He became deeply devout, praying 5 times a day and frequently attending sermons. When not reciting the Quran, he read religious texts and commentaries. He said his greatest desire was to die as a good Muslim. Still, Amin never abandoned his love for music. His favorite instrument was the accordion, which he played in the evenings. One of his favorite songs was a wartime ballad in Luganda. Neagalira ono amutono wange eava melutalo. I love the slender one from the war. He sang it softly, often to show that his voice, deep, strong, and seductive, had not aged. He also took up a new hobby, fishing along the shores of the Red Sea, near the Saudi-Yemen border. There, in the quiet waves, the former Field Marshal found a rare piece. He said he loved the delicious fish species found in the Red Sea waters, and the act of fishing gave him something politics never did: silence. Sports and television. Amin's love for sports never faded. A former Ugandan heavyweight boxing champion, he watched endless sports programs on TV. Football, boxing, and tennis being his favorites. His house was equipped with 5 satellite dishes, bringing in broadcasts from around the world. He watched CNN, BBC, Saudi Channel 1, and even French and Lebanese stations. Through these, he followed global events, wars, politics, and especially Ugandan affairs. He proudly told friends that he spoke several languages fluently: Arabic, English, French, and Lingala. His nights were often spent watching late-night news or documentaries. He was fascinated by the changing world and often commented that Africa was losing its values to Western corruption. He despised hypocrisy, especially among African leaders, and frequently compared their failures to what he called his own strong leadership. Politics in exile. Though forbidden from engaging in politics, Amin could not entirely detach himself from Ugandan affairs. He remained deeply interested in the fate of his homeland and often expressed bitterness toward President Yoweri Museveni, who had taken power in 1986. In private conversations, Amin complained that Museveni's government had seized or destroyed 5 of his houses in Uganda. By now, he told journalist Yunusu Abbey in 1999, those houses would have earned me rent to help my relatives. He warned Museveni not to insult him constantly, threatening to perform a dua, a special prayer that, he claimed, could bring misfortune to his enemies. Amin also condemned corruption among Ugandan Muslim leaders who had embezzled funds meant for mosque construction. Money originally donated during the visit of Saudi King Faisal to Uganda in 1972. Yet, he refused to revisit his downfall. When asked about the 1979 war that ousted him, he dismissed it with a wave of the hand. "It is history," he said. "I ordered my soldiers to withdraw because I did not want Africans to kill fellow Africans." His words carried both pride and regret, a soldier's stubborn justification for a lost empire. The private man behind the legend. In exile, Amin cultivated an image of calm dignity. He avoided public attention, refused photographs, and rarely allowed journalists to visit. When a Ugandan journalist finally tracked him down in Jeddah in the late 1990s, Amin insisted on meeting in secret and forbade any mention of his family. He appeared well-fed, energetic, but older. Wrinkles had begun to form on his once smooth cheeks. He still walked with the swagger of a general, but there was a softness now, an aging lion conserving his strength. He joked that people could guess his age however they wished. Let them say I am 60, 70, or 100. Shaori Yao, I am not bothered. His conversations were a mix of nostalgia, humor, and defensiveness. He often recalled his days as a boxer in Kampala, his friendships with old comrades like Tom Kawere and Kalabala. Sometimes, when he spoke of Uganda, his face would grow still and heavy. Those who met him said he seemed lonely, haunted not just by memories of power, but by ghosts of the dead. Hobbies and daily routine. Amin's days followed a predictable rhythm. Morning, he would wake early for the Fajr prayer, then spend time reading the Quran. Breakfast usually consisted of tea and kati bread. Midday, he might visit the market or receive packages of Ugandan food at the airport. Sometimes, he drove along Jeddah's Corniche, looking out at the Red Sea. Afternoon, Amin would play the accordion or watch sports. Evening, he liked to sit outside, watching the sunset, humming old war songs. Night, often, he watched news late into the night before saying his last prayers. In the early 1980s, he was known to visit fishing spots near the Saudi-Yemen border. He also entertained guests occasionally, mainly fellow exiles or friends from Africa. Despite his past, many Saudis treated him politely. He was Uncle Idi to some locals, a man who carried both infamy and charm. Letters and communications. Amin maintained a network of informants and friends who updated him on Ugandan politics. His former security aide, Major Luka Yuma, who lived near Moi Stadium in Kenya, frequently sent him newspaper clippings and reports. Others, known by the nickname Macho Mingi, Many Eyes, called him from Uganda to brief him on developments back home. He even tried to reconcile with Dr. Milton Obote, the man he had overthrown in 1971. Curiously, one of Amin's former wives, Helen Etchi, was a niece of Obote, linking the two rivals by blood and fate. Illness and decline. By the late 1990s, Amin's health began to fail. The once towering general, known for his strength and appetite, now weighed over 200 kilograms. He suffered from hypertension and diabetes, conditions worsened by years of inactivity and indulgence. He was frequently treated at King Fahd Armed Forces Hospital, and later at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital, one of the most advanced medical facilities in the kingdom. Even in illness, Amin remained proud. He told visitors that everything was in God's hands. He asked his children to remain united, to love each other, and to pray always. By July of 2003, his condition had worsened. Surrounded by his children, Iman, Kato, Moga, Mwanga, Lumumba, Mao, Maimuna, and Rajab, Amin slipped into a coma. He murmured the names of his late mother, Aisha Ate Chumaru, and his two sisters, Dir and Rafa. His final words, spoken in Swahili, were to his children. "My children, I have no issues with any of you. All I want is for you to love each other. If you are united, you will have everything. Be steadfast in prayer. I love you all." On the 16th of August, 2003, Idi Amin Dada, the soldier who once terrorized a nation and defied the world, took his last breath at the age of 75. Burial and legacy. That same evening, around 6 o'clock, his body, measuring 6 feet and 3 inches long, was washed according to Islamic rites. Prince bin Abdullah Aziz personally coordinated the janazah, funeral, prayers. Amin was buried quietly at Ruwais Cemetery in Jeddah, attended by about 300 mourners, family members, Saudi officials, and a few old friends. There were no speeches, no flags, no military honors. Only silence, prayers, and sand. His grave, unmarked and modest, lies in the shadow of tall palm trees. In Saudi Arabia, there are no monuments to his rule, no museums, no records of his crimes. Only whispers that the man who once ruled Uganda with cruelty and charisma spent his last decades fishing, praying, and watching CNN. A life of contradictions. Idi Amin's years in Saudi Arabia were a strange mix of luxury and solitude, faith and nostalgia. The man who once ordered public executions now lived as a pensioned exile, reliant on the generosity of the kingdom. He was both reflective and unapologetic, a man convinced of his destiny, yet haunted by his past. To some, he was a monster who escaped justice; to others, a tragic relic of post-colonial Africa's violent birth. Yet, perhaps the greatest irony of all was that Idi Amin, the man who once called himself the conqueror of the British Empire, died far from his homeland, in the care of Arab doctors, surrounded not by soldiers but by family prayers. His story, from Kampala to Jeddah, remains one of the most remarkable exiles in modern African history. The transformation of a feared general into a forgotten old man, living his last days between the holy call to prayer and the faint echoes of a distant empire he could never reclaim.